Cobain himself slept under a bridge, quite famously. Cobain did that record with William Burroughs. Burroughs was a beatnik. So the kind of shadow of the romantic tramp was fraught all through the grunge era, all through the 80s, all through the 70s, and we've talked about it in prior shows.
Van Sant, Van Sant was very interesting. He dedicated several of his films to Ginsberg, Burroughs, etc. Like, this genealogy is there.
Yeah, and so back on that book that's called Laughing on the Outside, not only does this book have a throwaway sentence where it says that Del Griffith was a common man hero as lovable as Chaplin's little tramp, but that's as far as that book goes. Here's the other thing that kind of connects to Cobain. He says that, here's how he explains the film's success. They recognize themselves, this is audiences recognize themselves in his performance, which made them want to honor Candy and be part of his success. Think of Cobain, though. They felt connected to him as if he were a close personal friend. Cobain. But this kind of adulation, though Candy had always dreamed of it, was as hard to handle as neglect. Cobain. Here's the last line.
Right.
After playing Del Griffith, John Candy could never go out in public without being mobbed by devoted fans. Never mind. Cobain. Movie watching America had fallen in love with him, and not even a string of third-rate movies could shake that allegiance. From the moment Planes, Trains, and Automobiles opened, John Candy had a big, new problem to cope with. The consequences of getting what he had spent much of his life wishing for. And when you learn what happens in John Candy's life after he became successful, which was a result of this film, he could now command up to $3 million per film. He was one of the most successful actors and certainly comedic actors in America for a brief period between the late 80s and early 90s. He's on top of the charts, just like Cobain, overlapping at least. And like Cobain, he could never shake his insecurities even after success. And there was actually a beautiful line, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find it, but the line was basically saying something to the effect of one of the things that Martin said about John Candy was that you could tell there was like a hole in his heart, and that pathos made him attractive, but also you could tell something was broken inside, very similar to Cobain.
Yeah.
And
this sounds like Chris Farley too, honestly. Read a lot about him and a very similar, a person who had a hole in his heart. And part of the reason he was popular and became such a figure that people were obsessed with was the realness of him, beyond just the pratfalls and beyond all of the kind of like broad physical comedy he did. Chris Farley felt like a heartbroken character to me. And when he died, it seemed like a predetermined thing in the same way we've talked about with Candy and Cobain.
Yeah, and I think with that, this goes back to the Cobain episode that we did. And one of the things we said there that I think applies here is there are certain artistic geniuses who come from positions, and for various reasons, whether that's structural or family or economic or genetic, something's missing inside that they use their creativity to overcome.
Yes.
But because that hole is always there, every success leads to a new vacuum. And that you can take the person out of poverty, you can take the person out of mediocrity, you can take the person out of anonymity, but there is something cooked into certain people that even when they achieve success and even a multi-million-dollar status, there's something heartbroken about them, and there's something tragic about them on the inside that in some cases overdetermines their fate. And overdetermines almost everything else. And I think that with both men, you see those misshapen masculinities, those misshapen class positions, and those misshapen affects that, however contorted and distorted and problematic in various ways at various times, they were men who ultimately failed to sustain a love for themselves that other people showed for them.